The House of Representatives begins this week consideration of legislation vital to the security and well-being of the United States and the free world. The Mutual Defense and Assistance Bill of 1963. I hope the House will give full support to the authorization recommended by the Foreign Affairs Committee. Our foreign aid program is essential to the continued strength of the free world. It gives us increased military security at a cost far lower than if we had to carry the entire burden alone. It gives protection against communist internal takeover to free people who are yet not able to build solidly without outside help. It provides essential assurances to the new nations of the world that they can count on us in their effort to build a free society. Only with this assurance can they continue to maintain against the pressures that are brought upon them. This does not represent an impossible burden for the United States. It's indeed only half as heavy as it was during the Marshall Plan. Then about 2% of our gross national product was allocated to foreign assistance. The program today costs only 0.7%. The bill before the House has already been cut, $850 million, from our original estimate last January. Fortunately, the bill now has bipartisan political support. More than half of the Republicans on the House Foreign Affairs Committee are in favor of the $4.1 billion authorization now before the House. This program is not an abstract set of numbers, but a set of concrete and continued actions in support of our national security. No party or group should call for a dynamic foreign policy and then seek to cripple this program. One wonders which concrete actions critics would like to stop. Should we scrap the Alliance for Progress, which is our best answer to the threat of communism in this hemisphere? Should we deny help to India, the largest free power in Asia, as she seeks to strengthen herself against communist China? Do we wish to dismantle our joint defenses in Korea, Taiwan, Pakistan, Iran, Turkey, and Greece, countries along the very rim of communist power? Do we want to weaken our front in Southeast Asia? This is no time to slacken our efforts. This fight is by no means over. The struggle is not finished. And therefore, as has been said on many occasions before, however tired we may get of this program, our adversaries are not tired. I don't think this country is tired. The cause of freedom should certainly not be fatigued, and therefore I think it's necessary that we continue to make this effort. I hope the House will support it. 80% of these funds are spent in the United States, and I think that it's necessary and essential, as the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, General Clay, and others, that the House figure be passed. Our experience shows us that the appropriations traditionally has been less, and I think it's incumbent upon us to support the action of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. I hope the House of Representatives will.
Mr. President, the Joint Chiefs of Staff have approved a series of safeguards they say will maintain our security under the Limited Test Ban Treaty. But there seems to be some feeling in Congress that perhaps these safeguards won't be carried out as vigorously and as fully as some of the members of Congress would like. What do you have to say to that?
Safeguards, as they suggested in the Chiefs of Staff, were all mentioned in my address to the Congress, which preceded their meeting. There's a letter going to the Congress in response to a request from the Senate Armed Services Committee, the Foreign Relations Committee, and we are going to describe in detail what steps we're going to take to implement the 4 safeguards. Now, the 4 safeguards consist of, 1, that we should keep our laboratories activated and vital. I've already met with Dr. Foster and Dr. Bradbury. We've talked with others. We're going to do that. Secondly, that we should prepare a standby so that if the treaty should be breached, abrogated, or if we should have what the treaty language described as an imminent threat to our security, we would be prepared to resume testing.
With you before the August 28th civil rights demonstration here, I wonder if you have any new thoughts on that march and whether you intend to participate or be involved in the activities that day beyond conferring with a group of leaders of the movement.
No, I've already given my view at a previous press conference, and I will As I've said, I've been asked for an appointment. I will be glad to see the leaders of the organizations who are participating on that day.
President?
Yes, let's go.
Dr. Keller has charged that the administration curtailed a number of the atmospheric tests last year for what he called political reasons in order not to alienate public opinion. And Senator Humphrey has called this a very serious charge. Could you say whether those atmospheric tests were curtailed and why?
No, we agreed. We had to set up a committee in the National Security Council headed by Dr. Seaborg, and we heard recommendations from the various laboratories, Los Alamos and Livermore, from the AEC, from the Department of Defense, and others, what tests would be most valuable. Obviously, we don't like to test in the atmosphere unless the test is essential. Every test in the atmosphere produces fallout, and we would be, it seems to me, remiss in not attempting to keep the number of tests to the minimum consistent with our national security. As you remember, there were 28 atmospheric tests. 28 atmospheric tests, 97, as I've said, underground tests. That's quite a lot of tests. Before that, there was a 3-year moratorium where there were no tests, underground or in the atmosphere. In addition, as you recall, we have to proceed with some care in deciding what tests. You remember one test went out and built an artificial Van Allen belt, which was far different from what had been imagined, which could have endangered our whole space program and indeed that of any other country. So we kept a careful eye, and we in fact did more tests, several more tests than we had originally planned 6 months before. So I don't think that the charge is valid. Quite obviously, we didn't test unnecessarily. Quite obviously, there may have been tests that Dr. Teller would like to have run. I don't know about that. But every test was considered by the National Security Council, was considered by the group of principals, of which Dr. Seaborg was the chairman. We carried out, as I say, several more tests, as I recall, than we had originally planned. We carried out in all 28. There may have been, as I say, several tests that different scientists wanted to run at one point or another. But I think we did the major tests, and I think they were an impressive series. But it'd be very difficult, I think, to satisfy Dr. Teller in this field. Yes.
Mr. President, you narrowed your search for a new Postmaster General, and are you seeking a man with a business background or a political background?
The search is narrowing, but we haven't. There are other fields that are still to be considered, including even a postal background.
Mr. President.
Mr. President, the ranking House Republican expert on atomic energy says that in spite of all administration denials, he's sure that there was a side agreement at Moscow. Is there some way that you can present any proof positive?
No, I can't.
President, this promises to be a very long session of Congress. There's talk of it running into Thanksgiving dinner or Christmas dinner, and there's beginning to be talk heard among some of the rank and file that possibly it'd be a good idea to put over both the Civil Rights Bill and the tax bill into the next session. Do you think, sir, it will be possible for the leadership to keep Congress in town long enough to pass both of these major bills?
Well, I don't see why not. And what's the advantage of putting it over till next year? We have other problems. We have the whole new appropriation series. You have election year. Good many excuses next year to get out of town. Seems to me this is the year for us to consider these pieces of legislation. I think there should be a vote on both of them this year. And they're both very important. The civil rights legislation represents a response to a very serious national crisis. I don't think it's a matter that should be put off till next year. The tax bill was recommended in January. It has not come to the House floor yet. It will come in early September. It should be possible for the Congress of the United States to dispose of this issue this year, 12 months. This is a matter which affects employment, jobs, our economic prospects, the struggle against a recession. And we're talking about a tax cut beginning in January '64. And we're talking about the state of the economy through the next 6 months, which I think is predicated in part upon a possible tax cut. The If that proved to be disappointing and you started all over again in January, when would you get it to a vote then? May or June or July of next year? And what would happen to the economy in the meanwhile? I think it's very important we get a vote on both of these this year, and I think that most congressmen will agree that they should meet their responsibilities on two very vital matters, and before they go home should have voted on these matters. I hope up, but at least voted on them. Yeah.
Sir, there have been reports that if the limited nuclear test ban treaty is ratified, that you and Prime Minister Macmillan and Soviet Premier Khrushchev might go to the United Nations and register it there. If so, if the treaty is ratified, do you see a possibility of conferring with them there and with other leaders such as Marshal Tito?
No, there's been no such plan. It has been suggested that I might speak at the United Nations, but I know of, and no decision's been made on that. But as far as any ceremony of ratification or summit meeting involving ratification at the UN, I would think that'd be very unlikely.
President, in your view, what do you think the effect of the August 28th march will be, both on the country and on the Congress?
I think the purpose, of course, is to attempt to bring to the attention of the Congress and the country the strong feeling of a good many thousands of citizens. I don't know, of course, I don't know how many are going to come. What we're really talking about is a problem which involves 180 million people. And that 180 million people, it seems to me, have elected the Congress and elected some of us to attempt to deal with that matter, so that this issue does not stand or fall on the August 28th. The August 28th is a chance for a good many people to express their feeling, but it's hard for them, a lot of other people, to travel. It costs them money. Many of them have jobs, so that I think that what we're talking about is an issue that concerns all of our people and must, in the final analysis, be settled by the Congress and by the executive branch working with 180 million people. This is an effort, however, to bring focus to the strong concern of a good many citizens, so that I think, as I said before, it's in that tradition that I meet with the leadership, and in which I think that it's appropriate that these people and anyone else who feels themselves who are concerned should come to Washington, see their congressman, see any of us if they feel that it's in the public interest.
Mr. President, I'd just like to ask a three-part question. Do you feel that Chetty Jagan, Prime Minister of British Guiana, is a communist? And what do you think of the possibilities of British Guiana becoming another Cuba should the British leave very soon? And is the United States trying to exert any influence on the British to stay in British Guiana or to suspend the Guiana Constitution?
Well, I don't think it would be useful to respond really to any of those questions. As regard to Mr. Jagan's political philosophy, I think he has made it clear himself, and his associates have made it clear. The British still exercise a responsibility in the matter, and I think that we should leave it to them to exercise that in a responsible manner. As to what might happen under hypothetical conditions in the future, quite obviously the United States government is concerned about what happens in this hemisphere and observes matters in this hemisphere closely. But I think it's very important that we point out that this is primarily a British matter, and we should leave the judgment to them.
Mr. President, in case that serious negotiations would be started with the Russians around the proposal to place some stationary control posts on both sides of the Iron Curtain, in what area should these control posts be stationed according to the United States' point of view, and could it be only on both parts of Germany?
No, I think we're a good long way from reaching any conclusions or any position on the question of posts. This is a matter which I think would have to be discussed. I think it's a matter that it has been discussed since it was first put forward 4 or 5 years ago. It is being discussed today in the NATO Council. It is a matter on which I don't think the United States will have a United States view, but I think that there will be a NATO view, and that view, I think, will be evolving after a good deal of consultation. So that in answer to your question, I don't think it would be proper to refer to an American view. I think this is a matter which we're going to have to work out in consultation, and then after the Allies have consulted about it and come to conclusions, then I would imagine there may be conversations between the Allies and the Soviet Union. But we're a good long way from that right now.
President,
Yes, Mr. Morgan. Yes.
Mr. President, some Negro leaders are saying that, like the Jews persecuted by the Nazis, the Negro is entitled to some kind of special dispensation for the pain of second-class citizenship over these many decades and generations. What is your view of that in general? And what is your view in particular on the specific point that they are recommending of job quotas by race?
Well, I don't think that is the generally held view, at least as I understand it, of the Negro community, that there is some compensation due for the lost years, particularly in the field of education. What I think they would like is to see their children well educated so that they could hold jobs and have their children accepted, have themselves accepted as equal members of the community.
Captive of the radical right. Do you see any indications that the influence of the radical right is growing to proportions where it might be a major factor in the '64 campaign and could, in effect, get enough strength to make any candidate a captive?
Well, I don't know. I don't know who's captured who. And I would think that this is a matter which can be best handled by the Republicans at this time. Then after we have a convention and a candidate, then I would discuss it in some detail.
Railroad management and unions have reached what appears to be an impasse by submitting differing proposals for arbitration procedures. Does this mean that the administration will now revise its proposals for compulsory arbitration in Congress?
No, I understand that there's going to be a meeting tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock of a select group of the Senate Commerce Committee who will meet with the parties with a proposal for settlement of the dispute. Then we'll have a better idea if we see if this proposal is accepted by both of the parties or one of the parties. If it's not accepted by the parties, then the Senate Commerce Committee must make a judgment as to whether they will accept the legislative proposals that we set up or some proposal of their own. But I think we ought to have an answer to your question by tomorrow morning. Yes,
Mr. President, you mentioned the economy in replying to a question about the tax bill. Could you appraise the economy at this stage? How are we doing? How is the economy going? Good, sluggish, bad?
I'd say good. I think it's slightly better, not much better, but slightly better than was estimated in January. So that looking over I think the Federal Reserve Board statistical comparison based on the 57-59 base is 100. It was 119 in January. It's 127 now. It rose, I think, a point in the last month, so that unemployment is 5.6%. Factory hours are strong, so I would say the state of the economy is good. What we're concerned about, of course, is what's going to happen for the rest of this 63 and 64, because we've now run from the winter of 61, fall of 60 and the winter of 61 when we had our downturn, 58 the downturn, 60 and 61. We've now run a pretty steady, with the exception of the difficulties of June of 62. We've had a pretty steady rise. Of course, you have to have a very substantial rise in order to take care of the number of people coming into the labor market. What I'm concerned, therefore, is that the tax bill be passed if we're going to see 64 another good year. But in answer to your question, standing as we do right now, I'd say the state of the economy is good. What we must be concerned about always, of course, is the future. That's why I consider the tax bill so essential.
Mr. President, can you bring us up to date, sir, on the Soviet troop strength in Cuba? Has there been a net reduction in the recent weeks and months?
Yes, there has been a decline in since my last conference. I think when we discussed it about 2 months ago, the intelligence community judges that there has been a decline. The primary emphasis of those who remain now is in training and not in concentrated military units. But there are still Russians there, and this is still a matter of concern to us.
Mr. President, Dr. Teller, in urging the Senate to reject the nuclear test ban today, said that it weakens American defenses and thus invites attack because the information that's necessary to develop a surefire anti-missile missile can only be developed through atmospheric tests. What do you have to say to this?
Well, I think Mr. McNamara answered that very clearly. Other scientists have answered it. I recognize Dr. Teller has made it very clear that he's opposed to it. He opposed it all last week and this week. Now, there are a good many other scientists with comparable experience. We have a scientific advisory committee to the president. We have other scientists who worked on nuclear matters. We have Nobel Prize winners and others. We have members of the military and others who think that the test ban is a source of strength to us. I understand Dr. Teller's opposed to it, but every day he's opposed to it, and I recognize that he's going to continue to be opposed to it. I think that the question was very clearly answered by Mr. McNamara on what effect the atmospheric test ban would have on the development of an anti-missile weapon. Now, let's just think of the other side of it if we begin to test again, and the Soviet Union tests again, and others begin to test again. How much security do we have? As I said before in my message I sent to the Congress, we needed only one test to develop the Hiroshima weapon. Now, to anyone who works in the laboratories today, a 30 megaton weapon is perhaps not as sophisticated as a 60 or 70 or 80 megaton weapon. But it's still many, many, many times, dozens of times stronger than the weapon that flattened Hiroshima and Nagasaki. How many weapons do you need and how many megatons do you need to destroy it? I said in my speech what we now have on hand without any further testing will kill 300 million people in 1 hour. Now, that's a... And I suppose they can even improve on that if it's necessary. So on your specific question, I refer you to Mr. McNamara's answer, which I think is the clearest and most specific answer that you could possibly get on what effect the atmospheric test ban will have on the development of this weapon.
Mr. President, in this connection, Utah scientists have announced that Utah children under 2 years have received from 2 to 28 times as much as radioactive iodine-131 last year in less than a month, as our government says is safe for an entire year. Does the government have any plans to examine some of these children to detect possible damage?
Well, I've seen the report about the radioiodine, and it is a matter of concern. As you know, the report is not unanimous. There's some controversy about it. And in addition, the standards that were set do not, I don't think we should mislead the people there that there is evidence on hand of a serious deterioration there. What, of course, is a matter of concern to us that we not continue. But we are looking into it. But I would say that as of now, that we do not believe that the health of the children involved has been adversely affected. What it does tell us, though of course these matters require further study, what it does tell us is it's very desirable to get a test ban.
Mr. President,
yes.
Apparently there is some consideration being given to the United States and Soviet Russia collaborating on the moonshot, and I wondered if in view of that there's any plan to have Soviet observers when the Apollo moonshot tests start at White Sands, New Mexico.
No, we haven't had any success in reaching any agreement. The kind of agreement to really be meaningful would require a good deal of inspection on both sides, and there's no evidence as yet that the Soviet Union is prepared to accept that. All we've ever gotten was an agreement to exchange weather information. We haven't anything more substantial.
President, do you see anything in the relationship of Secretary of the Navy Korth to the TFX contract which would suggest a conflict of interest?
No, I don't. Mr. Abel? No, I have the highest regard for Mr. Korth, Mr. Gilpatrick, Mr. McNamara, and it seems to me the matter's been looked into for many months, and I think they've emerged in a very good position.
Ambassador George Kennan the other day said he thought the most promising area for further exploration in East-West negotiations was President de Gaulle's idea about controlling means of delivery rather than nuclear warheads. Does this government have a position on that possible approach?
No, as I said, I think we'd be interested to hear what General de Gaulle might propose. How are you going to control the systems? We can, without inspection, we can detect atmospheric tests. The Soviet Union's been reluctant to have the kind of inspection which would permit us, which after all would be very limited inspection, to have underground tests detected. Now, is there any evidence that they would accept the kind of very detailed inspection, that control of delivery systems would entail when there's it gives out no signal as a nuclear explosion does. But General de Gaulle has not indicated the details of his proposal. We'd be very interested in it. We'd be delighted to join with him in any meeting to discuss it. But we have not had it described, and I have not yet seen evidence that the Soviet Union would accept that kind of inspection. However, we'll be very responsive if the proposal is put forward.
Mr. President, going back to your earlier answer on Cuba, can you say what our estimate is of how many troops have been withdrawn?
No, I think that it's difficult, as we can't call the roll, it's difficult for us to say precisely. But based on the information we have about outward movements and inward movements, it is the judgment of the intelligence community that there has been a reduction in the last 2.5 months.
President,
yes.
In view of the figures released yesterday by the Commerce Department on the balance of international payments, does the administration have any further measures it's going to recommend? It looks as though the deficit could be the largest since the war.
No, I don't think it will be. The second quarter was particularly difficult. Since then, the indications are better. In addition, as you know, we've taken 2 important steps, well, really 3. One is the tax, equalization tax. 2 is the interest rates. And 3 are the reduction in military expenditures and tying our foreign aid expenditures here in the United States. So we think that's going to make a important Quite obviously, we'll have to look at the effect of all those proposals.
Do you see an end in sight when there will be a balance?
Yes, I do, because I think that by one means or another we're going to bring it into balance. I don't think we could, quite obviously we would not accept it, but we are reluctant. Quite obviously we're not going to devalue because there's no necessity for it. It would be a defeating measure. So I eliminate that. It may not be necessary for us to proceed any further. You can see already the effect of even the rather limited steps we've been taking, 2 effects. One, the effect in Canada and Japan of the equalization tax, which shows the deflationary effect of this kind of restriction, and therefore we're reluctant to do it. Secondly, there was an article in the paper in the Times on Sunday about the effect on the euro dollar of our interest rate rise, so that everything we do shakes the West, the monetary system, so that we proceed with care. But we're still in good shape. A good deal of this outflow represents assets abroad. The United States, while a good deal of money has gone out, has also picked up a good many assets in Western Europe and all around the globe, which, while it means that our position may not be as liquid as it might, it does mean that we're in a strong position in regard to our ultimate balance sheet.
Well, let's call for any action at the next meeting of the IMF.
Not that we have planned, but I think let's see what effect the interest rate increase has in the short-term flow. This tax can be important, and the cut down on our defense and our foreign can be important, and there are other steps we may be able to take. We feel that with the rising cost in Europe that we're going to begin to come into balance, and we're going to bring it into balance. The question is, we would like to bring it into balance in a way that does not shake, as I've said, we don't want to have a 1928 situation where you take an action to protect your problem here and you cause far greater problems. I think this situation can be brought under control. And what we're now doing, I think, is an important step in that direction.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Bad, was it?